The worst part wasn't finding out he cheated. It was realizing how many times my body already knew, and how hard I worked to silence it. I kept his number in my phone for 2 years after I found out about the other woman. 2 years. I know how that sounds. Trust me. Every time I say it out loud, even now, there's this tiny voice in my head that goes, "Really?" Still. But I couldn't delete it. I'd scroll past his name almost every day and just leave it there. Like if I deleted the number, I'd have to admit the whole thing actually happened. God. Even saying that feels humiliating. And weirdly, when I think about everything now, the lies, the manipulation, the second relationship, all of it, that stupid contact card is still the detail that sticks in my head the most. Not the screaming fight. Not the message I got. Not even her. The number. Daniel. Still sitting there like a ghost I kept feeding. I told myself maybe I'd need it someday. For what? I don't know. I honestly don't know. Maybe I just wasn't ready to let go of the version of him I thought existed. Okay. Sorry. I'm jumping around already. That's the problem with trying to tell a story like this. If I start from the beginning, it sounds too normal. If I start from the ending, it sounds fake. Like something from a Netflix series instead of an actual life you lived inside for 4 years. But this happened. All of it happened. And there's something about finally saying it out loud that makes me feel sick, honestly. Because once I say it plainly, I can't hide behind confusion anymore. Here's the truth. I built my entire emotional life around someone who was never fully real. And before anyone says it, yes, I know manipulation exists. I know intelligent women get lied to every day. My therapist has explained all of that to me repeatedly. But understanding something intellectually is not the same thing as emotionally surviving the shame of it. Because the part one struggle with most is this. I helped him maintain the lie. Not intentionally. God, no. But I did. I ignored things. Explained things away. Talked myself out of instincts that were probably trying to save me. And I was good at it too. That's the really ugly part. His name was Daniel. I'm using his real name because honestly, I protected him long enough. I met him when I was 31 at a work conference. And I need to emphasize the age because people hear stories like this and picture some naive 22-year-old who's never dated before. That wasn't me. I had a graduate degree. I had a serious job. I ran teams. I'd had adult relationships. I was competent. Decisive. The kind of person people came to for advice. Which is why this completely destroyed my understanding of myself later. He was giving a presentation when I first saw him. Different company, same industry. And I remember thinking, wow, this man is sharp. Not flashy smart. Not arrogant. Calm. Specific. The kind of person who made complicated things sound effortless. Then we talked afterward at the networking dinner. 40 minutes maybe. Maybe longer. And this is the thing that got me. He listened. Like, really listened. I'd mention something small, and 20 minutes later he'd circle back to it with a question that proved he'd actually absorbed what I said. And if you've dated in your 30s, you know how rare that feels. Most conversations start sounding recycled after a while. Everybody waiting for their turn to speak. Everybody distracted. But Daniel made me feel understood immediately. Seen. That's where this started. Not sex. Not chemistry. Attention. And looking back now, I think people who make you feel deeply seen very quickly are often studying you more than loving you. I just didn't know that then. We dated long distance for 8 months before I moved to his city. And yes, I moved. Not him. At the time it felt reasonable. His job was more location dependent. Mine had flexibility. We had all these mature conversations about compromise and partnership and building a future together. So I gave up an apartment I loved. I left behind 10 years of friendships. My neighborhood. My routines. My favorite running trail. The coffee shop where they knew my order before I even spoke. And the loneliness after I moved there was heavier than I admitted to myself. I'd come home from work to this unfamiliar apartment and wait for him to get back because he was basically the only person I had there at first. And I think he understood that dependency faster than I did. That's the part that scares me now. Because some people experience your isolation not as responsibility, but as security. And honestly, I think that was the moment the balance of the relationship quietly shifted without me realizing it. I just thought I was in love. I had no idea I was slowly becoming someone who would learn to distrust her own instincts just to keep the relationship feeling safe. And the terrifying thing is, the first warning sign had already happened by then. I just didn't recognize it for what it was yet. The first warning sign was a woman named Petra. And no, she wasn't the other woman. At least not technically. Not exactly. She was more like the first crack in the wall. The first moment my body reacted to something my brain wasn't ready to understand yet. I met her at Daniel's office holiday party. I can still picture the whole thing weirdly clearly. Cheap gold decorations everywhere. Loud music. Everybody pretending they weren't checking work emails under the table. I was standing beside Daniel holding a warm glass of white wine I didn't even want when he introduced us. This is Petra. We work together. That was it. Nothing dramatic. She smiled. I smiled. Completely normal interaction. But the second she looked at me, something tightened in my stomach. And I know how vague that sounds. I hate vague stories too. But it really was just a feeling. Like static in the air. Like my nervous system picked up on something before my mind could label it. And instead of listening to that feeling, I corrected myself. Immediately. I remember driving home afterward and practically giving myself a lecture in the car. You're being insecure. You're projecting. You move to a new city and you're emotionally dependent on your boyfriend, and now you're inventing tension with another woman because you feel unstable. I actually said those things to myself out loud. God. I was so committed to being reasonable that I started treating my own instincts like they were embarrassing little flaws I needed to outgrow. That's one of the hardest things for me to admit now. I distrusted myself before I distrusted him. And once that becomes your pattern, once you start automatically explaining away your discomfort instead of examining it, you can miss a lot. The second time I saw Petra was at a work dinner with several people from Daniel's office. And again, nothing obvious happened. No flirting. No touching. No giant movie moment where everybody suddenly freezes and realizes there's an affair happening. It was subtler than that. Daniel tracked her reactions too carefully. She went quiet whenever I joined certain conversations. There was this strange current underneath everything that I couldn't fully access. And honestly, looking back now, I think she was trying to figure me out too. I think she was studying me the same way I was unconsciously studying her. Neither of us understood yet that we were standing inside the same lie. But again, I overrode the feeling. I even journaled about it later. I still have the notebook somewhere. I wrote something like, I need to stop creating problems where there aren't any and learn to trust Daniel. I coached myself out of my own intuition so efficiently. Like I was training myself to stay manageable. The relationship itself looked normal from the outside. That's important to understand. Because people hear double life and imagine non-stop chaos. But most of our days were painfully ordinary. We moved in together after about a year and a half. August 2nd. I remember because it was my mother's birthday, and at the time I took that as some kind of cosmic sign. Which honestly says a lot about my emotional state back then. I wanted reassurance everywhere. And there were genuinely good moments. That's what makes this harder to explain. We cooked dinner together. We binged terrible shows. We argued over thermostat settings and grocery lists and whether his dog needed expensive food. His dog technically. But she slept curled against my legs every night, so eventually she felt like mine too. Life settles around you quietly like that. You stop evaluating the relationship because you're busy living inside it. But underneath all that normalcy, patterns started forming. Daniel disappeared into his phone constantly. Not in a cartoonishly suspicious way. He wasn't hiding in bathrooms or turning the screen away dramatically. It was quieter than that. More controlled. He'd drift emotionally out of conversations while texting. Smile faintly at messages. Suddenly become unavailable for an hour. And every explanation sounded reasonable. Work. Always work. His job genuinely was demanding, which made the lies easier to hide. Emergencies. Late-night calls. Clients. Travel. Every excuse came wrapped inside something believable. That's the thing people don't understand about effective liars. The best lies are attached to truths. And then there was this other pattern. Every time I had plans with friends, especially friends from my old city, tension would suddenly appear between us. Not explosive fights. That would have been easier to identify. Just emotionally exhausting conversations. He'd feel disconnected. Or misunderstood. Or hurt by something vague I supposedly said 3 days earlier. Suddenly we'd spend hours talking in circles before I was supposed to leave. And eventually, I started canceling things. Not because he demanded it. Because it felt easier than carrying the emotional weight afterward. That's how isolation happens sometimes. Quietly. Gradually. 1,000 tiny decisions that don't feel dangerous individually. Then one afternoon, about 1.5 years into the relationship, something happened that I still think about constantly. I was using Daniel's laptop to print a document because my printer stopped working. And on the desktop there was a folder with a woman's name on it. Not Petra. Someone else. I remember freezing. Just staring at the screen while this horrible cold feeling moved through my chest. 10 seconds maybe. Maybe longer. And then I closed the laptop. Didn't open the folder. Didn't ask him about it. Didn't even print the document. I switched to my phone instead and acted like I'd never seen anything. I have replayed that moment in my head for years trying to understand why I walked away from it. And I think the answer is brutal. I think some part of me already understood that if I opened that folder, my entire life might change. And I wasn't ready for that yet. So instead, I chose confusion. I chose uncertainty over devastation. And honestly, that decision still haunts me. Because only a few months later, someone else tried to warn me too. And this time, it was his mother. His mother called me on a Thursday afternoon while I was sitting at my desk pretending to care about a budget spreadsheet. I almost ignored the call. That's the part that gets me now. If I'd been in a meeting, if I'd silenced my phone, if I'd called her back later, maybe the whole conversation never would have happened at all. We weren't close. We'd met twice in person. Exchanged polite birthday texts. That was basically it. She lived several states away and mostly existed in my life through stories Daniel told about her. So when I saw her name on my screen, my first thought was honestly that someone had died. I answered immediately. And right away, something felt off. Her voice sounded careful. Measured. Like someone rehearsing while they spoke. She asked how work was going. Asked how the city was treating me. Asked if Daniel and I were doing okay. Normal questions. But there was tension underneath them. I could feel it even then. And this is the thing that still bothers me. My body noticed before my mind did. That happened over and over in this relationship. My instincts would react first. And then I'd immediately talk myself out of whatever I was sensing. She finally asked, "And are you happy?" Not, "How's the relationship?" Not, "How are things?" Just, "Are you happy?" I remember laughing a little because the question caught me off guard. I said, Yeah, we're good." And then there was this pause. Long enough that I pulled the phone away from my ear to check if the call disconnected. I can still hear the silence. Then she said softly, "That's good, honey. I'm glad." And after that, she started to say something else. I just want. That's what she said. I just want. Then nothing. Silence again. I remember saying, hello. And she exhaled really slowly, like someone stepping backward from the edge of a cliff. Then she said, never mind. You sound happy. That's what matters. We hung up maybe a minute later, and I never followed up. Never asked what she almost said. Never called her back. Never even told Daniel about the conversation because some part of me already sensed there was tension there, and I didn't want to create conflict over something I couldn't fully explain. That sentence right there. That's the sentence that tells you exactly who I had become inside that relationship. I didn't want to create conflict. I had started managing his emotional state constantly without realizing it. Filtering concerns before bringing them up. Measuring whether something was worth discussing. Predicting whether a conversation would ruin the entire evening. That's not love. I know that now. But inside the relationship, it felt like maturity. Like compromise. Like being understanding. And honestly, I think that's why relationships like this are so hard to explain afterward. Because from the inside, the unhealthy parts often feel responsible, patient, loving. Until one day you realize you've been slowly shrinking around another person's comfort. The relationship continued another 2 years after that phone call. 2 years. And externally, my life looked completely fine. Successful even. I got promoted at work. Managed bigger projects. Led teams. People described me as decisive all the time, which honestly became almost funny later considering how uncertain I'd become in my personal life. But emotionally, I was changing in ways I couldn't fully see yet. About 6 months before everything collapsed, I visited my sister back in my old city. First solo trip home in almost a year. Daniel said he couldn't come because of work, which I accepted immediately because by then I accepted almost everything immediately. My sister and I were sitting in her kitchen drinking wine one night when she looked at me strangely. Not judgmental. Just observant. Then she said something that still gives me chills. You seem careful lately. I laughed because I genuinely didn't understand what she meant. Careful how? And she shrugged. Like you think about everything before you say it. God. I felt defensive so fast. Which should have told me something right there. I said I was tired. Busy. Stressed from work. But the truth was, she was right. I had started rehearsing conversations internally before speaking. Predicting reactions. Editing myself in real time. And I didn't even fully realize I was doing it. That's what's scary about emotional conditioning. It happens gradually enough that each adjustment feels normal while it's happening. Then somebody who knew you before looks at you and suddenly you catch a glimpse of the change through their eyes. Still, even then. Even after Petra. Even after the folder. Even after his mother's phone call. I did not think Daniel was living a second life. Maybe cheating crossed my mind abstractly once or twice. But not this. Not another relationship running parallel to mine for years. I couldn't even conceptualize that level of deception. And honestly, that's probably why it worked so long. Because I was imagining ordinary relationship problems while he was managing 2 entirely separate emotional realities. Then one Tuesday evening, sitting alone at my kitchen table with chamomile tea in my hand, my phone buzzed with an Instagram message from a woman I'd never heard of. At first I almost ignored it. Private account. No mutual friends. Barely any visible photos. But there was one sentence in the preview that made my stomach tighten immediately. I don't know if you'll believe me. And even now, years later, I still remember the exact feeling that moved through my body before I opened the message. Because some part of me already knew. I just didn't understand yet how much my life was about to split apart in the next 30 seconds. At first, I genuinely thought it might be spam. Or some weird scam. Maybe someone trying to start drama online. My brain was reaching for anything ordinary because the alternative felt too big to process. But there was something about the wording that stopped me. I think you deserve to know. People don't usually fake concern that specifically. I opened the message. And this is the part that still feels surreal when I replay it in my head, because while I was reading her words, my brain was simultaneously trying to protect me from them. Maybe she has the wrong person. Maybe this is exaggerated. Maybe she's unstable. Maybe Daniel dated her before me and she's confused about timelines. I was building escape routes in real time while the truth was literally sitting in front of me on my phone screen. She told me she had been in a relationship with Daniel for approximately 2.5 years. 2.5 years. I remember rereading that number immediately because my brain rejected it the first time. Not a hookup. Not some emotional affair that blurred boundaries. A full relationship. She said he'd told her repeatedly that things between us were basically over. That we still lived together because untangling finances and logistics was complicated. That he was trying to end things the right way. And honestly, even now, that phrase makes me angry. The right way. As if there's a noble version of maintaining two relationships simultaneously. I kept staring at the screen while she kept typing. You know that little typing bubble that appears when someone's responding? I still hate seeing it now. Isn't that weird? How your body remembers tiny things trauma attached itself to. Anyway, she explained that she'd finally started questioning inconsistencies in his stories. Little timeline issues. Strange disappearances. Excuses that stopped adding up. So she searched my name online. Found current photos. Current posts. Current evidence that I was not, in fact, halfway out the door like he'd apparently been telling her. Then she mentioned the vacation. And that was the moment something inside me physically cracked. Because she knew everything. The location. The dates. The exact week. I remember staring at my phone while this horrible cold sensation spread through my chest and arms. Because there was no explanation for that. No misunderstanding. Daniel had been telling another woman about the vacation we were about to take together. A vacation I had spent months planning. I had restaurant reservations saved in my email. Hiking trails bookmarked. Packing lists in my notes app. And meanwhile, somewhere else in his life, another woman knew those dates too because he had apparently explained them to her. Probably as an apology. Probably something like, I have to go away for a bit, but after that things will change. That realization destroyed me more than the cheating itself. Because cheating can still exist inside impulsiveness, weakness, self-destruction. But this required organization, maintenance, emotional scheduling. He wasn't juggling mistakes. He was managing realities. I remember setting my tea mug down very carefully on the table. That's still the detail my brain clings to. Not screaming. Not crying. Precision. Like if I moved slowly enough, maybe the room wouldn't completely collapse around me. Then I just sat there. For almost an hour, I think. The kitchen light buzzing softly overhead. The refrigerator humming. My tea going cold beside me. I didn't call anyone. Didn't confront him immediately. Didn't even fully cry yet. I think my nervous system just froze. And here's the part I've never admitted cleanly before because honestly, it embarrasses me. Before I confronted Daniel. Before I called my sister. Before I did anything logical. I wrote back to her. And my first question was not, how long? Or, can you prove this? Or even, are you okay? My first question was, why are you telling me this now, God? Even now that hurts to admit. Because what I was really asking was, please give me a reason not to believe you. Please be lying. Please sound manipulative. Please say something that lets me go back to the version of reality I woke up inside this morning. But she didn't. She stayed calm. Careful. Almost apologetic. She said she had finally ended things with him after another promise that he was close to leaving me. Then she saw evidence of our trip online and realized he had no intention of ending anything. And suddenly I understood something horrifying. He wasn't just lying separately to both of us. He was actively using information from each relationship to maintain the other one. Managing timelines. Managing absences. Managing emotions. He was standing in the middle, translating reality differently depending on which phone he was holding. That realization made me physically nauseous. Because it meant this wasn't chaos. It was structure. And somehow that was worse. I waited for him to come home that night. 3 full hours. 3 hours sitting in that apartment pretending my life still made sense while everything inside me rearranged itself. I remember hearing his keys outside the door. And this horrible thought flashed through my head. A tiny part of me still hopes there's an explanation. That's what love mixed with denial does to you. It keeps searching for softer interpretations long after reality has stopped offering them. He walked in carrying groceries. Bananas. Pasta. Sparkling water. Normal things. And weirdly, that image still hurts me more than some of the bigger moments. Because there he was, holding groceries for our shared life while another woman somewhere had just discovered she was never the only one either. I asked him to sit down. And immediately, I could tell something shifted in his face. Not guilt exactly. Recognition. Like some part of him understood the system had finally failed. Then I said her name. And the tiny pause before he answered told me everything. Everything. Because in that microscopic silence, I realized he already knew exactly who I was talking about. And what happened after that honestly disturbed me more than if he'd screamed or denied it outright. Because he stayed calm. Way too calm. Like he had rehearsed this conversation in his head long before I ever knew it existed. He stayed calm. Too calm. That's the first thing I remember thinking, even while my hands were shaking under the table. It wasn't panic. It wasn't denial. It wasn't shock. It was controlled. Like he had already stepped into a version of this conversation in his mind before I ever said her name out loud. I asked him again. Directly this time. No, I said. Don't talk around it. Did you have a relationship with her? And he leaned back slightly, like he was choosing his words carefully. Then he said, "It's complicated." I swear to God, I felt something inside me go cold. That sentence. Again. It's complicated. As if betrayal becomes less real when you wrap it in emotional language. As if complexity somehow reduces responsibility. I remember saying, sharper now, "That's not an answer." And he nodded. Not defensive. Not panicked. Just composed. Then he said, "I'm not going to pretend nothing happened. Not yes. Not I'm sorry. Not I lied. Just that." A sentence designed to sound honest without actually being honest. And then he started talking about his emotional state. That's when it got worse. He talked about feeling overwhelmed. Confused. Torn. Like he was caught between two situations that developed over time. And I just sat there. Listening. Actually listening. And that's the part that still messes with me. Because even in that moment, even after everything, some part of me still slipped into the role I had been playing for years. Understanding him. Translating him. Making his words make sense emotionally. I hate that. I really do. He said things like, "I didn't mean for it to get like this." And, "I was trying to figure out how to end things properly." Properly. As if there is a proper way to maintain two relationships for years without the other person knowing. And the strangest part? He didn't raise his voice. He didn't break down. He didn't plead. He just explained. Like this was a complicated misunderstanding instead of deliberate deception. And then he said something that still echoes in my head. "I think we both know we've had problems. We both know. Something snapped in me right there. Because suddenly I could see the strategy underneath everything. The quiet redistribution of blame. The subtle reframing of betrayal into shared dysfunction. Like I was a participant in my own deception instead of the person being deceived. And the terrifying part is, a younger version of me might have accepted that framing. I might have sat there questioning myself instead of him. That realization made my stomach turn. I stood up at some point during that conversation. I don't even remember deciding to. I just remember suddenly not being able to sit there anymore. I told him to leave. And he did. No fight. No dramatic reaction. Just a slow nod like he'd been expecting this outcome for a while. Which told me something I didn't want to understand yet. I called my sister immediately after he left. Or at least I tried to. The first time she answered, I couldn't speak. My mouth opened and nothing came out except air. And then it hit me all at once. Everything. The message. The vacation. The phone calls I ignored. The folder I didn't open. His mother's pause. Petra. All of it collapsing into one unbearable realization. I started crying so hard I couldn't breathe properly. My sister kept saying, I'm here. I'm here. Just breathe. But I couldn't. I kept saying, I didn't know. I didn't know. Over and over. Like if I repeated it enough times it might somehow separate me from what had just happened. I went back to my old city 3 days later. My sister picked me up from the airport and didn't ask questions right away. That silence mattered more than anything else. She just brought me home. Made tea. Put clean sheets on the bed. Sat with me without forcing explanations. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was managing someone else's emotional reaction. I just existed. But the aftermath wasn't clean. It wasn't sudden healing. It was waking up every morning and remembering the same thing again and again like it was new. There were days I would get out of bed and feel okay for 10 minutes before the reality hit me all over again. Not once. Repeatedly. That's what betrayal actually feels like. Discovery over and over again. And I started seeing everything differently. The grocery store near our apartment. The couch. The routines. Even the dog, his dog technically, who kept waiting by the door at the same time every night like nothing had changed. That part broke me in ways I didn't expect. Because the dog didn't understand. She just kept waiting. And I would sit there on the floor sometimes thinking about how many layers of life I had been living inside without seeing the full structure underneath it. And the question that wouldn't leave me alone was not, how could he do this? It was, how did I not see it? Because once I laid everything out. Petra. The laptop folder. His mother's unfinished sentence. My sister noticing I had changed. The fights before I saw friends. The emotional distance disguised as work stress. Once all of it lined up. It didn't look confusing anymore. It looked structured. Like something I should have been able to read. And that thought haunted me for a long time. Until my therapist finally said something that changed the way I understood all of it. She said the hardest part isn't that people miss deception. It's that some deception is built specifically so you will miss it. And I didn't fully understand what she meant until much later. When I realized I still wasn't done uncovering the truth about him. When my therapist said that, I remember not answering right away. I just sat there staring at the floor like the words were still sinking in slowly, even though my mind was already racing ahead of them. Because part of me didn't want that explanation. It felt almost too clean. Too forgiving. If what she was saying was true, then I wasn't just someone who missed things. I was someone who was led to miss them. And that's a very different thing to sit with. I actually said to her, that still makes me feel like I should have known. And she shook her head. Very calmly. She said, you were inside a system that punished you for noticing too early. That sentence stayed with me for a long time. Because that's exactly what it felt like, even if I couldn't articulate it at the time. Any time I got close to discomfort, something would happen. A conversation would shift. A problem would appear. Emotional tension would replace clarity. And over time, I learned, without ever being told directly, that certain instincts came with consequences. So I stopped trusting them. Slowly. Quietly. Without realizing I was doing it. That's the part that's hardest to explain to people who haven't lived through something like this. It wasn't one big lie. It was 1,000 small recalibrations. 1,000 moments where I chose peace over discomfort. Clarity over confrontation. And eventually, survival over truth. I went home after that therapy session and sat in my car for a long time. Just sitting. Thinking about the vacation again. I always come back to the vacation. Because that was the clearest example of it. While I was planning restaurants and packing lists and flights in my head, he was actively managing a second emotional timeline with someone else. Explaining those exact same dates to her in a completely different emotional context. And somehow both realities were running at the same time. That's what still makes me feel sick if I think about it too deeply. Not just that he lied, but that he maintained coherence in both lies long enough for them to feel stable. And somewhere in all of that confusion, something strange happened. I ended up speaking to her. The other woman. About 8 months after everything collapsed. I didn't plan it in some dramatic way. It started with a message I typed and deleted a dozen times before finally sending something simple. Just asking if she'd be open to talking. When she replied, I felt my stomach drop immediately. Not because I was afraid of her, but because I realized I was afraid of what hearing her voice would make real. We talked on the phone for almost 2 hours. And the first thing that struck me was how normal she sounded. Not bitter. Not theatrical. Just tired. Careful. A little like me, actually. And that similarity honestly unsettled me more than anything else. Because I had expected a villain. Or at least someone who felt like the opposite of me. But instead, I found someone who had been slowly built into the same confusion I had. She told me the same thing I had once believed. That he made her feel seen. That he was attentive in the beginning. That he listened in a way that felt rare. That line hit me harder than I expected. Because I realized that wasn't love. It was a pattern. Attention first. Emotional precision. Deep listening. Then gradual dependency. Then isolation disguised as intimacy. And suddenly I could see how both of us had been moved through the same emotional architecture without realizing it. We weren't enemies. We were just placed on different sides of the same structure. And that realization changed something between us. Not instantly. We weren't suddenly close. But the hostility I didn't even realize I was carrying started dissolving in real time during that call. Because there was nothing left to compete over anymore. No version of him left to win. Just two people trying to make sense of something that had already ended. We still text sometimes. Not often. Birthdays. Small updates. Nothing heavy. And I think that's enough. Because some experiences don't turn into friendships. They turn into understanding. A few months after that, I got a voicemail from his mother. I still have it saved. I don't know why exactly. She said she was sorry. She said there were things she had wanted to tell me earlier but hadn't known how. And I remember sitting on my kitchen floor listening to it over and over again, thinking about that pause in the phone call years before. That almost warning. That moment that could have changed everything. Or maybe nothing at all. I still don't know. And I've stopped trying to resolve it. Because eventually you realize there is no version of this story where you get perfect closure. Only different levels of understanding. Some heavier than others. And healing, for me at least, didn't look like answers. It looked like distance. It looked like mornings where I didn't immediately think of him. It looked like running the same route I used to run before I met him, and realizing one day that I had gone almost an entire hour without circling back to the past. That was the first real shift. Not dramatic. Just quiet. And eventually, I deleted his number. 2 years after I found out. I stared at it longer than I expected to. My finger hovered over the delete button for a long time. Because even then, some part of me still associated that number with something unresolved. Not love. Not even attachment. Just unfinished meaning. But I deleted it. And nothing exploded. Nothing collapsed. Nothing changed in the world except my phone losing a name that had been taking up more space in my mind than it deserved. And I sat there afterward thinking, that's it? That's what it looks like. No closure. No final conversation. No emotional resolution. Just removal. And weirdly, that was enough. I'm 45 now. I'm back in a city I actually love. I have my sister. My friends. My routines. My running path that feels like mine again instead of something shared with a ghost. And I still think about everything sometimes. Not every day anymore. Not the way I used to. But enough to remember something important. He saw me quickly. He understood how to reach me quickly. But he never actually knew me. Because if he had, he would have known that eventually, even after all of it, I was going to leave anyway. And maybe that's the only part of this story that feels like mine again. Not that I stayed. Not that I didn't see. But that I eventually chose myself back. One small decision at a time. And I think, that's all there is left to say.